now that we have the menu page set up, we now need to create an API for all of the drinks that are on offer, along with the details for each individual drink. So I'm going to create a new folder in the API folder, which is going to be called drinks. And within drinks, I'm going to name a file called index.js. And what we do is very similar to the store. We get a handler function. So what we could do is copy this, but I have already done so. So all you do is the very same as the store.js, where we export a function named handler. So I have already done that. And if I copy what I have and paste it in, what we now have is a new function which has a list of drinks on there. They have a name for the drink, a URL which is an image URL similar to this one here. We have an ID per drink, the drink type, so if it's a coffee or all, this will be used to filter out the drinks like this drop down select here. We have the category name which is coffee. We have the description which we will use when we create our pages like so. So this description here. And just finally, we have a large image URL, which is this large image here. So now that we have created this, if we save, and if I go into localhost /API and /drinks, which is what we've named it, we now have an API which contains all the drinks data that we need. So all we need to do now is create a dynamic API route. So at the moment, if I was to go on /1 for the ID and press enter, we would reach a 404 page. So what we want essentially to happen is when we go on /1, we get all the data returned back for the drink that contains the ID of 1. So in this case, that would be the Energizer Caramel Latte. So what I'm going to do now is if I go into the Next.js doc, now we have already created the handler function. We now need to go into the dynamic API route. So in here, what we can see is the following piece of code. So we want the route where if we go onto the /API /drinks instead of post, and then we also want the ID of the drink. So in this case, the ID would be 1. So it would be /1. So all we need to do now is create a new folder within the API folder. So in this drinks folder, I'm going to create a new file, and this is going to have the array like brackets, and I'm going to name this ID, and I close the brackets .js. So as you can see just below, we can model this in two ways, the first way or the second way. So we are going to be doing the second way here, as we have already defined the structure within the folder. So to catch all the routes, I want to name my slug as ID.js, which we have done. We then need to import all of the drinks within the index.js file. So what I have done here at the bottom is I have done a module export of the handler. So within the ID.js file now, we want to create a copy of all the drinks and put it in a constant at the top. So if I copy the entire array of drinks like so, copy that across, and then if we create a constant in the ID.js file of Costa drinks, so these are all of my drinks, which is equal to this array. So if we paste that in here, what we now want to do is do a comparison. When we get the request.query parameter in there, there should be an ID. So now that I have all my drinks within the ID.js file, I also want to create a new handler function. So if I copy the code I have here, I'm going to call this function handler again, and we get a request and response object within the handler. So within the request object, we get the query, and within the query, we can destructure the ID. So the ID could be anything after the drink, so it catches the next route. So /drink/test, it could be /1, 2, 3. So in this case, we are going to use the IDs of the drinks as the catch route. of the ID. So what we are doing now is we're doing a comparison within here, which gets all of the drinks declared above. We're going to filter. So for each drink, we're going to get the drink ID, which is equal to the ID from the request query. So the ID within this URL. So that would be 1, 2, 3. We're going to get the first index of that, and then what we're going to return as the 200 status is the matching drink. So now if I save and if I go into the /3, for example, I should now get the energized vanilla latte with vitamin B12 zinc. So if I go and enter, it has now filtered out with the request ID in the query as 3, which matches up to the ID within this object. If I do another test and we check for the ID of 12 as a drink and press enter, and now we get the ID of 12, which is the caramel hot chocolate. If I was to type in test, for example, we now get a blank page because there's no ID matching to the test string. So now that we have the API set up, we can now carry on and continue building out the menu page.